record this now, everyone. Welcome, everybody. And I'm hoping everybody can hear me.
Yes, we can.
All right. I am Camille, and I want to say give out a warm Pacific Caribbean greeting to everyone that has joined us. It's really good to see you all here. We've had apologies, but we've had surprised quite a number of people that are here. I just want to, before we begin, I just want to introduce Polo and Andy, our two lovely IT people from the university, and they will just give you a couple of things that you need to know. What about the raise hand?
Yep. Okay. If you have a question, if you put participants at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a raise hand icon in the participant list at the bottom. And if you click raise hand, Camille will see that you have something to say or something to ask. To take your hand down, you can click the raise hand button again.
One kind of nice tissue.
I have not seen that raised hand.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it either.
So when you click participants down at the bottom,
look at the bottom of your screen, you see something that says participants.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see it now. Yeah.
Okay. And if Camille asks you a question, you can also click the yes or the no button.
Can you people like what they're showing up?
Yes, more of everybody's showing up.
Is that okay with everyone?
Not exactly. This is Valerie. I click participants, but when I click participants, I see the raise hand. Yes, okay.
Yeah, that's what you need. And
so if you click raise hand now, Valerie.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that you've raised your hand, and now I can lower your hand.
You lowered my hand, you said?
Yes, so now your hand is not raised anymore, is that correct?
No, it still looks raised.
Are you referring to Valerie or Veronica?
it was Valerie. Veronica. Valerie, did you click raise hand?
Yes, I did. I'm clicking it again.
Yeah, do it again, please.
I just did it again.
Yeah.
Raise hand, yes. Are you seeing it?
I'm not, it is Valerie again.
Okay, but from the instruction.
If you move it, it was on, but now it's not there.
Okay, from the instructions, should we not just go through the chat? I could wait and just put a question in the chat, and then you could answer at your leisure.
You can do that for all others who can do the raise hands. I can see you because we saw Veronica's raised hand.
Okay.
And the other thing is about sharing.
When Camille shares something from her desktop, you won't be able to do anything on your desktops. So we'll share the agenda now, just to show you what happens. So can everybody see the agenda?
Yeah, we're seeing.
All right.
Okay.
But you won't be able to do anything on your computer while I'm sharing until I go.
Stop share.
Okay. But everyone should have a copy of the agenda anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's begin. We have a lot to cover, and if you aren't speaking, if you could mute so any noises you may have in the background can go. So welcome everyone again, and it's really lovely to have you here. I've noted the apologies. I'm really glad you can join us all, and people are leaving. I wish I would leave for the next 10 minutes, but okay, but they have to go. But thank you.
I'm sure we'll be fine.
Do I have you on speed dial by any chance?
Mobile number.
What's your mobile?
It's 022
Yeah.
528
Uh-huh.
40.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, let's see if we can manage without our two lovely people. Okay, before we get into it formally, I'd like to ask Joanne, invite Joanne back. She'd like to say something to us. Joanne?
Thanks, Camille. Greetings, everybody around the world. This technology is quite familiar to me, having worked with people all around the world. I bring very sad news. One of our colleagues, Dr. Jennifer Lavie, who was very instrumental in the first set of talks that we had, Camille, when we were initially talking about this, passed away on Tuesday night. Last Tuesday, sometime last year, end of July, Jenny she had a brain tumor, and she never really recovered from that. And I just wanted to take the opportunity, one, to share the news, but two, to express, my own personal thanks to Jenny for what she had done in terms of my own professional career when I first met her when she was in tutor. And I'm sure many of you may know her, but I just thought we would have an opportunity to honor her and remember her in the work, especially her work in raising the issues of post-colonial. And she was quite instrumental when we had the DPR conference a few years ago. Veronica, do you remember?
Yes.
At UTT. So rest in peace, Jenny. We will certainly miss you, and we will continue to work hard.
Thanks, Joanne. Our hearts and thoughts and everything are with those who knew her. Okay. A quick round of introductions. I'm Camille, and I'll just call you out as I see you on screen. Veronica.
Yes, Veronica Farrell, from Trinidad, ex-UTT lecturer. I'm now doing my doctoral degree with the University of Liverpool online. And well, we continue.
Thank you. Heather?
You're from the south of New Zealand in Dunedin. I'm at the University of Otago. I'm a long-time colleague of Camille's, and I came to the conference in Tobago last year.
Thank you. Andre?
Hi, Andre Poyser from Jamaica. I recently left New Zealand after studying for a year, doing my master's there in finance, and doing my research on Maori investments. And yeah, so my interest really is in terms of looking at the synergies between Caribbean research methodologies and Kaupapa Maori research methodologies.
Thanks, Andre. Susan Chan?
Hi, good evening. Susan Chan from University of Southern Caribbean in Trinidad and Tobago. So nice to be here with all the sea of scholars here. I'm the Director for Research and Innovation at the university, and I'm a medical anthropologist.
Thank you. Annabelle?
Hi everyone, buenos dias, good morning. I am Anna from Cuba, and I am currently in Auckland. I am Camille's doctoral student, and I am working on my PhD, the end stage of my PhD, which is about cultural identity using Laime and Oto as a methodology. So we will discuss later. Good to be here with everyone. Good to see you again, Andre. Looking good. Looking good, everyone. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Jennifer? Jennifer Adams, Jennifer, you will need to unmute your... We're going to Joanne.
I'm Jennifer Adams, and I'm here at the University of Calgary. I also have like a courtesy joint appointment at the Victoria University, Wellington. And I've done, my main research is in science, secondary science education and post-secondary science education in informal settings. And then I've done some research on sense of place of Caribbean students in the diaspora.
Thank you. Natalie?
Hi, good evening, everybody. I am Natalie Batson from Barbados. I did my master's at Auckland Uni a few years ago, and I'm currently doing my PhD at the University of West Indies, Cave Hill, looking at Caribbean museology and working with the Barbados Museum.
Thank you. Nigel?
Hello, Nigel Noriega. I'm with Sustainable Innovation Initiatives, formerly a research biologist, but now I'm helping to connect all the folks that don't normally talk to each other.
Saran?
Hi, everybody. I'm Saran Stewart. I am a senior lecturer and PhD dean here at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, and my research area is formerly in international and comparative higher education. But have a book coming out on decolonizing methodologies this summer for and by the Caribbean. So very excited about this group.
Thank you. Shakisha?
Hi everyone, I'm Shakisha Wilson Scott. I am Jamaican and I'm currently in Jamaica. I spent about 4 years in New Zealand at the Auckland University of Technology, where I pursued and completed my PhD. And though Camille wasn't my supervisor, she was one of my academic mentors. And so that started a part of the partnership here that has helped to inform our work on Latin Caribbean research methodologies. I'm currently a senior lecturer and research officer at the Knox Community College in Jamaica.
Thank you. Susan? Herbert?
Herbert, I'm also at the University of the West Indies, but at the St. Augustine campus. It's nice to be here with all of you to discuss these issues, and I look forward to the meeting.
Thank you. Valerie?
Hi, good afternoon all. Well, it's afternoon in Trinidad and Tobago. Valerie Stout from UTT, well, at least until August. But I am so glad to see all of the faces from the 2018 symposium at Valsayn College. So happy, Saran. I'm happy to hear that the book is on its way. And I have to say that as somebody who has facilitated a lot of focus groups before coming back to UTT in 2008 and since coming back to UTT, a lot of my graduates, my doctoral students have done focus groups as part of their research. Still, I cannot remember being as excited as I was in September to be introduced to Lyman and Old Talk. And it is my intention to try to insert that into research at UTT. I am confident it will be accepted. And I just want to say quickly, I am just happy that this symposium has come off today. Thank you, Camille. I'm going back to mute.
Thank you to all the organizers, Margaret, Shakisha, and Anna. Now, okay, let's move straight into Shakisha is going to discuss the format of the forum. She's got 2 minutes left so that we can schedule.
Thanks, Camille. No, Camille started by identifying by saying persons should have access to the agenda that was sent out and has been repeatedly sent out. So most persons, if not all persons, should have access to that. And the agenda will indicate to you just really the format of what is occurring. So the various themes by which we are guided and some of the discussion questions. And so we will begin with that, and during each theme or under each theme where there are guided questions, persons have the opportunity to contribute, ask questions, and that can be done by either typing the question or raising your hand, after which whoever is facilitating the respective sessions will acknowledge those hands and we can have a structured conversation. Just a reminder, however, that the session is being recorded, and so if persons do not want to have that visual aspect of themselves recorded. Just maintain your camera off, but you can still raise your hands and so on. Are there any questions as it pertains to format? No. Well done. So I now hand over to Camille and Anna.
All right then. So if you have a look at the agenda, if you need to see the agenda, just let me know and I could share it again briefly. But our opening discussion is liming and old talk as methodology and method. And we thought that we would want to discuss that because there have been a number of questions as to whether is liming and old talk a method, is it a methodology? And for me, having taught research methods as a paper for many years, there is a distinct difference between methodology and method, and it was important not to confuse the two. Valerie referred to quite rightly focus groups, and that we see that as a research method. We also wanted to look at, is a LIME a method, is it a methodology? But when you look at the concept of liming and its cultural nouns and its history and everything that went about it, as you know, a research methodology frames your research. It tells you how the research is going to be carried out, any theoretical impositions that we may have on it, as opposed to method, which purely in a academic sense refers only to the way you collect data. So you're looking at liming, which cannot or does not encompass old talk as part of it as a method, but we're looking at liming as a methodology and old talk as a method within that, because liming as itself it's what frames the way we work, we interact. It has a cultural perspective to it, and it also tells us what can happen in that space. And so this is where the discussion started off, and Anna will say a few minutes on, and then we would just want to leave it open to you to say what your thoughts are, because it's very much to hear your voice. Anna?
Thank you, Camille. My whole research experience before this doctoral thesis have been in pretty much mainstream qualitative methodologies. I've always been working with interviews and focus groups as well, but the experience of doing research through liming and old talk, and specifically with a view on keeping things coherent with the Caribbean worldview, I can second Camille in what she's saying, that liming and what liming entails and the process of sharing and the importance of relationships, the informality and unstructured nature of liming and everything that it determines pretty much guided every process of my research, including the sources that I needed to consult as part of my literature review, the way that I had to apply for ethics approval. This is something that we will discuss later on. But also it guided how I recruited participants by inviting them to LIME, which every one of us Caribbean people know exactly that it is not what you would expect from a traditional recruitment process. It required establishing a relationship that is different from the traditional relationship that is foreseen by Western methods that will be established between a participant and a researcher. And of course, it guided the way that fieldwork, to keep using the mainstream academic terms, was conducted. And it has also guided the way that I have analyzed the results of this data. So yes, liming, I agree with Camille, that can be considered a methodology because it pretty much determines the structure and the content of your whole research. And however, old talk and the multi-layered conversational dynamics that take part as part of a LIME was indeed for me a method, because it guided the dynamics in which the conversation occurred during the LIMEs and how data was collected. It also determined how my participation as a researcher could not be that of a distant, silent participant, but as a limer. And since I am a Caribbean migrant myself, pretty much an insider to that conversation, because old talk doesn't really force you to have that distance based on how you are at a different level with participants. So that also then determined the way that I collected my data, and I pretty much see it as a method as well. So that's my experience with empirical research. But I also wanted to just hear from people, and Andre has an insider experience to this as well, because he participated in the research. I remember that it was his first day in New Zealand, and another mutual friend just brought him to the Lyme, as we do. And we had really important, interesting conversations, so he can give some insight on his side as a participant and how his experience was as compared to other. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here, but I think you have a very valuable counterpart to share. And so yeah, that has been my experience. I'm still in the process of writing the results. It's been a ride, I have to say. And but yeah, this is really, I second everyone in saying that this is really exciting. And having conducted research with mainstream methodologies all my life, I can see that there is a lot of changes, and I'm looking forward to exploring those with everyone. So thank you.
And before we leave it open to everyone, I'd just like to welcome Jamal Glynn, who is just all right. It's open now to everyone.
Okay, so can I go ahead and share my experience having participated in a Lyman Old Talk session?
Yes, go ahead.
Right. So our session, I think I participated in 2 of them. They took place at Camille's home, and the setting was very informal, and there was a wide cross section of Caribbean people there. And of course, one of the most important elements of the experience was how a lot of the discussion shaped itself around the food that was prepared, and you know, that was used to really bring us together. So breaking of bread, I think, is a unique experience in the Caribbean, in that it brings people together to discuss and to be more open and to feel comfortable. And so just having that sense of family around Camille's home and around the meal that was prepared allowed me to feel very comfortable to, 1, listen, and to 2, be willing to share my own experiences. Another thing about the experience was that it bridged the divide in terms of age, because the group was composed of older Caribbean people and younger Caribbean people, and it was very interesting to see how the experiences of young Caribbean people in New Zealand intersected with those older generation, and that was another important element. And I think the methodology itself, in terms of how it brought us together and brought us into a space of comfort, kind of facilitated that gap between older and younger. And the final element I want to add was that we were actually videotaped. And I think for me personally, in the beginning, there was some element of performance anxiety, in that you knew consciously that the camera was there. And so you sort of wanted to, you know, measure what you say and be careful about what you said. But after a while, the way that the discussion developed in such an organic way, particularly around the food and around that sharing of the space, you, after a while, forgot that the camera was there, and you were more free to be yourself.
I just want to note one thing. For those of us who are used to having not disclosing our participants and breaching confidentiality, which is a very, very good reason that it's there in many cases, and Anna will talk about this later on in terms of ethics, we actually got permission from ethics committee here to be able to share participants' names. And we took a lot of guidance from, if you look at First Nations people in Canada, and looking at their work, they talk about the fact that they want people to know who's speaking, who the elders are, because people listening and hearing those voices want to know which group they come from, or I don't want to use the word tribe, but where they belong to, who's speaking, who's giving them permission. And that was an important aspect too in getting permission to those who didn't want to, of course, give their permission to be listed. We also respected that. And in case there were questions in your mind about breaching confidentiality, that was it. Before we go any further, there are some questions from Valerie and Jennifer about everyone in the line knowing each other, the methodological challenges, and what contributes to good research. So Jennifer and Valerie, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, Jennifer, since Jennifer answered my question to a certain point or agreed with part of it, let me tell you, I am not worried about since you separated so clearly, Camille, Lyman as a methodology and Old Talk as a method within that methodology, I think that the designers, you, Shakisha, Margaret, whomever, need to give us clear guidelines as to the methodology. Mine, I have no problem with the alcohol. I think we need to say that this methodology calls for alcohol as an option. We're not saying everybody has to use alcohol. But what bothers me is a traditional line has music, and that interferes with the logistical collection of information. So that is why I said, I don't know how we can deal with that. The other thing is that in a traditional line, all the people in that line know each other. Now, the facilitator does not have to know those people. So when Maria mentioned collecting participants, I am wondering if, again, from the designers, there could be some sort of guidance where you're allowed to actually collect the entire line as a participant. So I will leave that now for Jennifer to take over. Let me go back and mute myself.
Yeah, I mean, I was just really responding to what Valerie posted and, you know, thinking about like with liming as a methodology, like what's necessary for a good line and how does this contribute to or detract from good research? Because like we all that have participated in limes as a part of our, you know, cultural activity, we know that they can be noisy, as you know, there is music, there is food, there is alcohol. Sometimes it is that people are all talking at once. The subject changes pretty quickly. You know, so how, like, what structures need to be in place? And I mean, I guess maybe is this a way of unfortunately colonizing the research if we try to put structures around it? And if we're doing like liming as a methodology, obviously we're doing it to learn about specific things. So how do we keep it on track to learn about those things without taking away from the true essence of what a lime is? So those are just the things that I guess that came to mind as we're talking, and it made me also reflect on research that I've been doing with a group of teachers who most of them happen to be Caribbean. There's like I think there's one or two who are not, and one, well, they're all Caribbean, but one is from Puerto Rico, and the other one, she's from the South, and sometimes they have similar, the American South, similar cultures, and how I didn't call it liming, but maybe the way that the dialogues happen, it was pretty close to that. And we did have food, we didn't have alcohol because of it was in a school context, and there wasn't music involved, but I guess the way that the conversations unfolded, because a part of liming too is that sometimes there's teasing and there's going back and forth with people, and then that goes back to the question of, does everybody in the lime have to know each other? Because some people who maybe are either not a part of the culture or not familiar with the people may be offended by some of the teasing that happens, you know, but that's also a part of, I think, setting up a space of trust and like reciprocal vulnerability. So these are just some of the things that, yeah, and I'll stop.
Anyone else would like to join in on that? Anna? Yeah.
I think the questions are really important. And when I was writing my chapter about liming, some of these questions were central to how I was trying to explain the use of liming as a methodology. So starting with the music and the more logistical challenge of recording, my strategy was to use several recorders in different places of the room. And in my experience, unless the music in the background was very loud, it wasn't an issue with recording voices, because recorders nowadays are designed to sort of lower the background noise and highlight the human voice. So usually music in the background is not a huge challenge. What was a challenge in the first Lime is that I used one recorder alone. And since people move around a lot and form subgroups of conversation, I decided to use up to 4 recorders in different places in the room so that I could capture the sound. And then when I was transcribing, sometimes I could see that the voice in one recorder was too low, so I would switch to another recorder because I had like a map of where the recorders were located. So that made it easy. I didn't have any challenge with transcribing a line with music. Now going to the deeper issue of the relationship that is established in the Lime, first of all, I haven't done this with people who are not from the Caribbean. That means that everyone is familiar with the dynamics of liming and is able to draw on their own cultural and communicative competences around the practice of liming, which is quite specific. And as you say, the discussion and the topic, the changes of topic and the fluidity of the whole thing can be seen as a challenge by research that sees the process of conducting a study as something that is designed to the convenience of the researcher, because it is the researcher who goes into the field with a set of questions, and then all of the dynamic develops around that set of questions. But when you go into the field with your questions, there is no way of knowing if those questions are the questions of all the participants. So what was brilliant about conducting research in this way is that the questions emerged from the groups. And of course, we had groups of students who were aged from 19 to 25, and then we had groups of elder Caribbean migrants who were aged 85 years old on average. So you can foresee that the questions that were relevant for them and the topics that were relevant for them wouldn't be relevant for the others. So there was no way that I could have captured what interests these groups of Caribbean migrants in New Zealand if I had come with my own set of questions. So that process of topics emerging and topics changing and then coming back to the topics and people talking over each other, if certainly it can become a challenge in terms of the timing that it will take you to process the data, it assures that the data that will emerge is authentically what people are interested in discussing. And that creates, so the process of sharing food, as Andrew was mentioning, even if participants don't know each other, that process organically entails people introducing each other. And one interesting thing is that people brought food cooked by themselves, even when we said that we were going to be providing food. So the process of bringing a plate from your country was a conversation starter and was a gesture of openness by sharing that food that people had cooked. And also the sensorial process of getting the smells of the food that reminds you of home, getting the visuals of the food that reminds you of home. It's a way of establishing a common ground and saying we're all from the same place, we're here with an open heart, and it sort of bypasses the process of formal introduction or the process of do I know you or do I not know you. That was my experience, at least.
If I may just say something quickly, I think the experiences that Andre and Anna shared with us are invaluable. I think, again, the designers should incorporate Anna's experience, and that is the experience of using the multiple recorders, and the other, Andre's experience in that you try to tell them, ignore the camera, it's just for transcribing. And I think that with time, we will get the whole, and skill and trying to get answers in while keeping true to the methodology, we will be able to cope with the multiple voices at the same time. I just want to emphasize again that in writing up the the structure for the methodology, which I expect the designers to do, we should say that we could recruit an entire line as, instead of recruiting separate participants, there is also the option to recruit a line of people. And just quickly, for example, I wanted to use this with farmers in the river. They're going to know each other. So when you recruit, you could recruit a whole bunch of people who know each other. Okay, so I'm muting again.
Can I ask, is there, Valerie, I'm not quite clear. Do you think it's a problem recruiting people who know each other, or do you think it's a benefit? I'm not quite sure where you...
No, well, I am thinking that it is a benefit if you could recruit a line as a unit, okay? Because then it sticks true to the methodology that in the line, the people know each other. And they have that familiarity, and the teasing that Jennifer mentioned, it's not just teasing, but sometimes speaking a common language. And I'm not talking about English, or I'm talking about the language of the area, the idiom of the area, the sayings, the whatever. And I'm thinking again of my farmers in the river. So I think it's a benefit, but it doesn't have to be a must. And I am, because you made this distinction, and it is obvious that the designers want to establish liming as a methodology, whereas liming itself is loose and fluid. I don't think the description of what liming is should be. I think in describing, to make it accept, make sure everybody's on the same playing field, even with the fluidity, the designers could specify certain things, incorporate suggestions. Like Anna's suggestion is great, because it's always the noise that bothered me. So with Anna's suggestion, I'm no longer concerned about the noise. I was never concerned about the alcohol. And I'm not really concerned about the multiple voices speaking at the same time. And I don't think you have to get, because again, Anna's experience of bringing people who didn't necessarily know each other makes that a valid line to me. But I think we should specify it. When I say we, I mean the designers, that you could recruit an entire line. That is not usually done in a focus group, where you recruit a block of people who know each other. But I'm saying that in Lyman and Old Talk, that should be permissible, and it's even more real to the methodology. Okay, I'm muting again.
Thank you, Valerie. Just a couple of things. Just referring to what Jennifer said about she'd spoken with someone, one of the groups where someone from the south of the states had a similar discussion. Yes, Jennifer, I found that also. And speaking to Lisa Boleg, a professor at Georgetown University, I think, George Washington University, she said exactly the same thing. They have similar ways of learning. And I gave a guest lecture in New York where one of the students, a mature woman, said she was actually, I talked to her about liming and Old Talk, and she said, yes, she was thinking of using, it sounded good and it sounded appropriate to what she wanted to do. And I said, what were you doing? And she said she wanted to talk to women her age about perimenopausal experiences. And she thought that type of conversation or interaction was the best way to do it. And she had opted out from doing focus groups. But in terms of a Lyme, I see Jennifer here has written, when strangers come in, they feel immediately comfortable. Jennifer, that is absolutely true also, because in any of all the Lymes we had organized, and whether they were called Lyme in Trinidad or something else in Jamaica or something else in Cuba, people brought people with them, and they immediately felt comfortable, maybe because of the sharing of the food and the drink. So yes, that's exactly what happened, and I see people have agreed at the end there. Now we can continue this conversation. It depends on you. I will go by what you want to do. We can continue this conversation. I know this we're a bit over time for the time we have allocated. So what do you want to do? Go on to the next topic and or continue this one?
Camille, I think the topics are going to revolve around the same. They're covering different sides of the same conversation. So I reckon also we have allocated some time for questions and answers at the end of the session. So we can always come back if there is something that we haven't covered, that would be my take.
Everyone agree with that? Just put a nod. I can see faces. Nod or put your hand up if you, everyone, I can see the nod. All right, so we're going to move on to the Caribbean. We Caribbean Research Methodology update, and I will let Shakisha Wilson Scott lead that.
All right, thanks, Camille. But the point that you made in sharing of your colleagues' work or desire to use LOT, I think is a good start point, because the question is, what projects are there that yes, the question is saying that use other research, Caribbean research methodologies, but it's also good to hear about other individuals outside of this circle who have started to think about actually embracing a Caribbean research methodology, whether it's LOT or not, in their research and seeing the suitability of it as it pertains to their project. And so I'm happy for that example, Camille, because when you think about it and the work of talking to women about their menopausal experiences, it's personal, it's intimate, and really an informal setting where you lose the facade and the mask that we can wear on a daily basis. It creates that sense, that space for really sharing, truly sharing, and being true as well to our identities as Caribbean folk. Having said that, I open the floor as well to persons to respond to these questions. Know that outside of LOT and Caribbean feminism, which in our own work we identified as Caribbean feminism as another established methodology where there has been work, but there hasn't been much continuation of that work currently. What projects are you aware of or are you engaged in that are attempting to promote Caribbean ways of researching and knowing? And it will be good to hear of those across the Caribbean and, of course, the Caribbean diaspora as well. Anyone willing to share? Let me.
Well, while everyone is thinking about what to say, I have an email that came through from Manuela Campbell. I think she is based in Britain, and her concerns or questions that might address what Shakisha is saying is that with the research methodology currently being taught at universities and used in practice, she says, the extent to which lecturers are able to keep abreast of all of these contemporary research methods. She's saying qualitative methods are so much more than a basic focus group. And I think she was looking at, I cannot speak for her, but I do have her permission to read this out. Maybe she saw Old Talk as just a focus group, but as we know, it's more than that. And she's saying there are many other qualitative methods to be of equally of use in the Caribbean, and it should not be excluded because it did not originate from that region. So she said her question really is the Caribbean research methodology only about Caribbean methods, because that will exclude work, any other work being done in the Caribbean context. My response wasn't that. It was not about excluding other methods. It was about affirming what we have and affirming our own ways of knowing and sharing as value in and of itself. Because we've talked a lot about prior people, others have talked about decolonizing methodologies. And I think we need to acknowledge that, but also go beyond that to say, yes, we know we need to decolonize methodologies, but also let us affirm our methodologies as value and in and of itself, and not just simply in opposition to the decolonizing process. So what are your thoughts on that?
If I may, Camille, just quickly, I wanted to first to get clarification from Shakisha, but we'll come to that after. Qualitative, I think, comment takes, in a sense, too narrow a view. Qualitative, to me, methodology is simply obtaining information through words, for the most part. We do sign language as well, but it is really obtaining information through words, principally. Why I like Lyman and Old Talk is because it represents a true format. And the thing about it is, you, what as the researcher, you have to have a way to collect the information and summarize it. Those are logistical challenges you cannot get around. But Anna described, in listening to Anna's experience and Andre's, and getting it from that point of view, we understood what participants in LOT have experienced. And what we see, Andre spoke of the comfort and the relaxation, the sharing of food. Anna did the same thing. It's special. It's not just another form of a focus group. Far from it. For one thing, with a focus group, the food comes after. And that is a trite example, but it's true. The whole business of sharing food, of relaxing while you do it, these are, it's special. It's not, okay, here is our alternative for focus group. And that's all it is. It is a way of collecting information through words using a very, very typical Caribbean methodology. And nothing can be excluded. If somebody else wants to talk about something else that is done in the Caribbean, the fact remains is we will continue to do semi-structured interviews in the Caribbean. We will use our Caribbean nature in carrying it out. Some people may continue to do open interviews, which I don't particularly like, but we'll continue to use focus groups. For example, if it's a technical thing, you may want to use a focus group. That may not be the place for a line. We are not saying that we must drop every other methodology. We are just saying, here is something which is actually more appropriate in some circumstances than the formal focus group. And in my experience, I have thought of some circumstances, I've not yet used it, where Lyman and Old Talk will actually be a lot more applicable in those circumstances, will allow, as Anna said, me to get more authentic information, me to get information from people who are speaking from their heart, as Andre said. So I don't think by pushing Lyman and Old Talk, we are trying to exclude other things or say no other qualitative methodology must be used in the Caribbean. And after that, let me stop there. And then I wanted an explanation from Shakisha about feminism, but let other people continue with this aspect before Shakisha answers.
If I can moderate a little bit there, because I'm not sure if Shakisha is seeing the question, she may be, but Nigel, you had a question which I think is a really good one you might want to address, and then Jennifer too.
And then I'd like to contribute, Camille.
Yeah. Nigel, are you there? Okay, while Nigel, I'll send Nigel a message. Jennifer, you want to talk about the epistemic disobedience and answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a question, but I guess in thinking about what you pose and when we're thinking about decolonizing, and it's, you know, so it's a challenge that I've been thinking about for a long time because we're working within the institution. So obviously there are structures and language and things that determine what we do, but how do we think beyond that? Because I understand what we're saying about, like, we're using Lyman as a methodology, but it's not exclusive. It's not exclusive of using focus groups and other things like that. But if we're really thinking about like decolonizing the same way that indigenous people have been thinking about indigenizing, then how can we, I guess, expand it or think about it or rethink the language that we're using so that it really is a methodology that is true to the culture and the language and the ways of interacting. And I know that in Sylvia Winters or McKittrick's latest volume, Mignola talks about this notion of epistemic disobedience, and it's really about thinking beyond like that colonial system, you know, thinking beyond the languages and the structures that have guided like how we've been thinking about research or what counts as valid research. But of course there is a challenge in that because there is a space where we want to be legitimized in the academy, but then we also want to be true to this methodology that is a valid way of collecting, a culturally valid way of collecting information, you know, from people. So I don't know. So that's why I just kind of put it out there, is if, you know, are we always going to be trying to align anything that we come up with language and structures that already exist within the academy, or is that something that we have to do, or, you know, how should we be thinking about moving beyond that? That's, I don't know, because I mean, like, you know, because when we think about like the decolonization aspect too, a lot of the decolonization, we're still using like the language and structures of the academy because it is a challenge.
It is very interesting that you mentioned Sylvia Winter, because one of her main points, and she was one of the pivotal theoretical references that I used. One of her main points throughout her whole work is that the Caribbean cannot be defined by the confrontation of different elements, but it is more defined by how these elements changed each other and generated something new. Mm-hmm. So the way that I see what we're trying to do is not as rejection or as a confrontation with the existing framework of research, because by defining Liming and Otok or Caribbean research methodologies in general as a reaction to mainstream methodologies, we are in a way still subordinating what we do to an existing canon or to an existing framework. The way that I see Caribbean research methodologies, at least in what it has been in my experience, it is a transformation of the way that we do research to be authentic to the lived experience of participants. Because in mainstream research, usually what researchers ask participants to do is to get outside their framework of reference, to go inside a mainstream Western research framework of reference. So by doing that, we are forcing the participants to bridge the divide between the way that we live and that we see the world as Caribbean people, to be able to constrain themselves within the framework of research methodologies. And that is what we are trying to breach, and that's what we are trying to get out of the way, to be able to create a space for participants to share their own experiences in their own terms. So whatever transformation that brings into the research, then that is the transformation that these type of methodologies are trying to bring, instead of seeing it from the point of view of what does that mean for the dominant framework. We are trying to see it the other way around, taking the participants' communicative and cultural competences as the main point of reference around which the research methodology is constructed. Shakisha, would you think that?
Right, I agree with Anna. So we have to, in answering the question of how do we do this, we have to move away from the point of that continuous comparison where we indirectly or even subconsciously reinforce the Western methodologies as that thing to continuously compare ourselves to. So it becomes the benchmark against which our own cultural ways of knowing and doing can be legitimized. In our experience, there has been a fear or lack of boldness to actually embrace our own ways of doing research. We oftentimes, in my own experience, there's a question of, so what has been published? And so we are following the usual and dictated formal ways of accepting something as legitimate, before actually boldly doing it, even though within ourselves we know that this thing exists and that we do it continuously. For example, liming and old talk, noting that this is just one illustration of a Caribbean research methodology and method. The other thing I've experienced is that there is still, and Camille touched on it at the very start, that there seems to still be that uncertainty of the distinction between methodology and method. And because of that, there is a clumsy dance, for want of a better expression, between what should be method and what should be methodology. And so there's this confusion. And because of that confusion, it's easy to default to the Western ways because these things have been dictated, they're published, and they're literally preached within our tertiary settings. I mean, just today, yesterday I had a conversation again of someone coming to me and asking me about a method and then trying to link the method to a research design. And so failing to follow the usual steps in terms of you arrive at your method from your methodology, or even and looking at the thing that you're trying to research. Our tertiary settings as well, and I think Jennifer spoke to this. There is an established system of what should be the structure, the course outlines, the content of the course outlines, etc. So how do we move away from this and begin to deliver content that is unique? Now, as an academic myself, I know there are such spaces which we can create. It's called informing our own courses or creating new courses, and doing our own work in developing the content of such courses and standing firm to what we believe as well. There will be resistance, and I say there will be resistance because we have already experienced resistance. I remember when Camille visited and we went to a university and we met with a senior lecturer there, and there was this blatant rejection because, and in fact it happened more than once, because one, we were told that it's the suggestion was that it wasn't valid, it wasn't relevant, and that the individual positioned themselves as more quantitative, where it is more scientific and rigorous, etc. In another instant, there was a suggestion that the cycle is being recreated, but we couldn't find evidence of that, where there was something that exists and that we were actually recreating it. So there is this positionality of being sided with something that is almost embracing something that's not of ourselves, as Anna said, where we are required to use something external to and adopt those lenses to understand ourselves. So it just requires a shifting of positionality really for it to occur. And I believe it's feasible. Persons like Anna have boldly done it, and I know there are others as well. And even as Andre has said in the discussion, where if we look at other indigenous methodologies, for example, Kapapa Maori, where it's about being Caribbean, it's about being true to ourselves and our identity, and that really is the starting point.
Okay, if I can break in here, because you all want to stick to time to get through everything, what Shakisha has just said is a good segue into the resistance to Caribbean methodologies, and which, when I refer to Manuela Campbell's questions and concerns, I think it's very, very valid, and I think she's putting it out there for debate. I can tell I'm in the Caribbean because I'm hearing the dogs barking. So those were the dogs. You might want to feed a dog or something. I just want to point something out. Where we're going with Lyman and Old Talk is not just a mine, Shakisha, Margaret, Anderson. We would not have gotten anywhere with this Lyman from all of us that we're doing now. And I want that very strongly to be acknowledged, because too many times we take ownership of something that really we shouldn't claim ownership of. And this is really a tribute to everybody here and those who are not here who have entered into this space. So really heartfelt thanks for support, for the debate, for the conversation. One thing I do notice is a real line going on here, because like we have some very silent voices and people just listening in, and I think that's cool too. But it would be really nice if I hear from others, so we don't think that you drunk or asleep or anything.
Okay, my hand is up, Veronica.
Jennifer is leaving now, so
Veronica. Okay.
Jennifer is leaving now, so thank you very much, Jennifer.
Bye, Jennifer. Thank you.
Contributing today.
Thank you so much. Nice meeting everybody, and I hope we can connect.
Yep.
Thank you, Jennifer. We'll keep in touch.
Sorry.
Okay.
Bye.
Definitely. Bye-bye. Bye.
Okay.
I know.
Can I say something?
I noticed, yes, of course. I just say I've noticed that the number of questions coming through, so I hope people are paying attention to the chat. And if you want to speak to what you're writing about, please do so. Sorry about that, Veronica. Go ahead, because we now enter free resistance to new methodologies. Go ahead.
All right. I just want to say quickly, trying to connect with what we know in terms of ways of meeting. I'm really attracted by this prospect of liming on Oto. I know we are trying to get away from the Western labeling and so on, but we have exemplars. I'm thinking, however, the concept of community of practice. I think we need to, where we are located, like I'm in Trinidad, we should start by whatever our agendas are, we should start sharing it. So I think we should start, establishing some definite bonds. I want to throw out the concept of the cottage meeting. I know it might sound, but to me, that's the closest equivalent. And, to the liming. It's like when I grew up, your mother used to have these family meetings where you have the same food, and you invite people to your house and so on, and it's around a particular theme. So that's the closest I'm visualizing it. So community of practice and liming, yes, but more the cottage meeting kind of format. Where just that basically. So I'm really excited about the possibilities, but I think we need to start where we are, invite people from where we are geographically located, set a date. Let's have some meetings around the agenda, research agendas we have. So we have a track record. We start building a track record of what we're doing. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for that. Annabelle, you were facilitating the resistance. You want to carry on with that?
Yes. Great. So I think it's a nice flow, because we're going to go into the next section with a lot of really good ideas in our mind. I will keep an eye on the questions, and I will try to keep my preliminary discussion brief so that we have more time for this interesting conversation, which was really the point of the whole forum, is that to get more voices and more people into this movement that we are creating together. And I second Camille on what she's saying. This is something that it takes people from different, with different experiences and coming from different countries. I think is going to strengthen the movement that is behind developing Caribbean methodologies enormously. So I am also very thankful for everyone who's taken the time to be part of that. So the next topic that we have at hand from the agenda is revolving around the questions of what challenges exist to disrupt the efforts to developing and integrating the use of Caribbean approaches in academia, research and policy planning, and CNC, Caribbean research methodologies as an enabling space. What I would like to do is to still keep my discussion grounded to my own experience. It has been a very interesting experience working with Camille and Shakisha and Margaret as in a way as a research group that started from our mutual interest in finding ways of doing research that were more aligned to our ways of being. And a strength that that initial group had, and is something that I can see growing, is that we come from different parts of the Caribbean. Specifically myself, I come from Cuba, which, as you know, is a Spanish-speaking Caribbean country. And it is very usual that people identify Cuba as a Latin American space. which is something that, in a way, I think has to do with the language, but it also has to do with the way that Cuba is portrayed to the world. I have to say that my experience with working with liming also in Cuban context is that the practices of liming, um, on the one hand, cannot be unified to be seen as something that is the same across the Caribbean, but is more repeated with very specific ways in the different islands. And that's something that I think we can enrich as we move forward, incorporating the different nuances of how liming is conducted. So my first experience with that resistance in Cuba is that the concept of liming is not the same in every island, and I believe that trying to unify that can be a bit confusing for people. But also, moving to my own PhD experience, I am, as Shakisha, I am doing my PhD program in AUT, which is a New Zealand university in Auckland. And from the start of the process, me and Camille as my supervisor, we prepared for having to do some extra work in terms of explaining our terms, because we're coming from a Caribbean framework, and this is a university that is in New Zealand. However, bridging that logical space of uncertainty of what is it that we're talking about, because that concept of liming is not shared, the general expectations of the process, for example, of applying for ethics, I can foresee that that can be an issue that will have to be addressed, and that I believe that with more and more experiences of Korean methodologies being used in empirical research is something that will create a useful precedent for people to use. In my experience specifically, I had three main issues with the ethic application. The first one was the expectation of predictability in my field work. That means a specific time allocated for visits, the duration of the encounters, which is something that we know that with liming, you have to keep fluid and you have to keep a level of unpredictability as part of your framework, because there is no way of knowing when exactly a lime is going to end, or when exactly is it going to start, and how many participants are going to be there, etc. So that is something that we had to challenge quite intentionally. The second part was the expectation around obtaining written consent, which is something that we intentionally trialed in the first two limes. And the bringing up of paperwork as part of a lime was highly disruptive of the liming environment that had been created, as Andre was sharing, through the sharing of food and the sharing of that loose, unstructured space. So we moved to obtaining oral consent, using the word of people consenting to be there in the line, being their voices and their experiences being recorded. But that was a process of challenging that initial expectations that we would obtain a signed form as a form of consent. And lastly, and this is something that I intentionally left for the end, because it is addressing one of the questions that Andre was asking in the chat, is how do I position myself as a researcher as part of the liming, of the liming process, which was the methodology through which I was conducting research. That is a very important question. I think it's a central part of what we're trying to construct. First of all, there was an expectation that as a researcher, I would keep myself distant from the rest of the participants and from the information that was being shared, under the premise that if I was to share my own experience or get too close, I would have the potential to transform what was going on and bring bias to the research. And this is a very interesting concept, because if we think about it, the fact that the researcher can influence the participants by sharing her own experiences comes from an assumption that the researcher holds some sense of authority over the participants, hence is able to influence them by sharing their own points of view and their own frame of reference. In liming, however, it was my experience that positioning myself as another migrant, as a Cuban woman, and as a limer, being a Caribbean islander myself, when I shared my opinions, it was not only it was not the case that it would influence participants, but also it was creating the narrative that I was there with an open heart as well, and not being an external observer of people's lives and narratives. And it was expressly said by many Limers that if I had been distant and if I had been just observing silent, that would have disrupted the dynamics of the Lime. So challenging that and trying to explain that to an ethics committee is something that we have to acknowledge. Many of us that are working in foreign settings that are not in the Caribbean, is something that we have to explicitly say and explain, because I got my ethics through, and it is, if of course it was a challenge, but it's something that if we portray as something that is being intentional, and that we are not just casually interjecting or casually just sharing experiences, but it's something that is quite intentional, there are ways of addressing that. Also, just to, as a last question to open the discussion, I wanted to mention a concept that is also aligned with what Jennifer was talking about, the epistemological disobedience. Is the concept that is developed by a series of Latin American authors like Quijano and Maldonado Torres, which is the coloniality of knowledge. And the concept of coloniality of knowledge is interesting because it brings the idea, many people to which I have talked about my research have said, but why are you talking about decolonization if colonization is over? So why are we still having this discussion if many of the countries that have been colonized are already independent, including New Zealand, or including Cuba, or Trinidad and Tobago, or Jamaica? And so this concept of coloniality of knowledge, what it brings about is the idea that yes, colonization from the political and economic point of view, mostly political, economic not so much, is over. However, although political colonization has ended in most countries, the structures for knowledge production and dissemination of the colonizer are still pretty much in place through the teaching of the right ways of doing research, through the selective allocation of funding, through the research publication mechanisms, etc. So the intention of this preliminary discussion is just to set the scene for other people to share their own experience through trying to challenge many of these mechanisms and the strategies that they have found to get their alternative views or processes of doing research through. So by this, I open the discussion. I'm just going through the chat, looking at the comments.
And Anna, just to be sure, Valerie has a hand up to speak, and I think Susan.
Yes.
Others have made a point.
Okay, so can we speak? So we have Valerie, we have Susan, and then we have
Well, I kind of wrote a lot, so why doesn't somebody else speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can speak, but I kind of wrote a lot of what I was feeling as you were speaking, Anna.
Okay, Anna,
so I'm going to mute and let somebody else speak. If there is time, you can come back to me.
Okay, can we hear from Susan? So Susan was responding in a way to what Valerie was saying, but she's making quite an interesting point. So would you like to share with the rest of the group, Susan?
Susan.
Susan, are you there?
Hey, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, we're hearing you now.
No, I was just thinking in terms of the resistance and in terms of the whole idea of legitimizing through a benchmark that is outside of the region, whether even within our culture, our people, of course, clearly would tend to think that liming an old talk, oh, that's just not serious. You're not doing any serious work with that. And how do we address that challenge? Has that challenge emerged in your own work? And is part of our work within the CRM to change those perspectives, to try to change those beliefs, to develop different benchmarks and ways of doing research? Is that what we are thinking of as this group here? So it was really just speaking to what I had written, but it's a question that perhaps someone can share if you've had that experience the responses in that manner from persons within the Caribbean when you approach them with Lyme and Old Talk, similar, I guess, to Mrs. Scott and her approach to the academics and the resistance there. But do we get the same kind of subversion, if you will, from even participants, or is that likely?
Can I'm sorry to intrude again because I know I've spoken a lot, but I have quick comments to make. One is, I don't consider that we need an external legitimization. I think what we need to do is to stick to the demands of research itself, the demands of the logistical demands of collecting data. And I think as long as we stick to that, we are safe. Honestly, we know that we have a mandate to accurately as possible, capture the information that is given to us, and then to summarize it in a clear, coherent manner. We have one guiding principle, and that is, well, authenticity, validity. One doesn't usually talk about validity in qualitative research, but nevertheless, it is there. Tacitly, you want to be valid in terms of truly conveying from the participants to the audience what the participants actually felt, even if you are one of the participants, as in participant observation, which is what I said. So I don't think we need an external source. Now, with regard to people thinking that we're not doing work, I honestly believe that if we apply the methodology of liming and introduce a method within that methodology by which we can collect information, that the information we collect will be so interesting that people will no longer focus on, oh, it's just a game, because we will be giving them deep insights. And people understand when you're giving them information that makes them say, oh ho, where they have that aha moment when you present what you've learned. If what you present itself has no authenticity, they're not going to be interested in it and they will challenge what you did. But if you give them something that is so interesting, and I think this methodology and the method within it together have the potential to deliver the goods, to be able to show people that you're getting information that you could not get elsewhere, or by using another method. And that is true of all methods. When you're doing research, you use the method that suits you. I wouldn't use Lyman and Old Talk if I felt that a focus group was more applicable. I wouldn't use a focus group if I felt that a structured survey is what I wanted to use, as well as there are times when I find I can use them both. Okay, because I am not afraid of either. And I don't think we need to be afraid. I think we just need to specify it. And, you know, truthfully, once the designers have taken great steps in legitimizing this. They've given us the ability to cite what all of the barriers that they have conquered and things like that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to redo that. They have done it for us in a lot of the instances. Anna's experience, record all around. We can cite her research when we use it ourselves. We did this because Anna did it and she had success. That's how it works with every methodology. So I am not worried. I'm not worried at all.
Okay, I just want to respond to that. And it says for some reason my chat is only going to Andre. I'm not sure why. Just a couple of things with that. When Susan, you asked rightly, and you asked whether we had encountered what people thought about Old Talk, whether they saw it as casually, and I agree with everything Valerie just said there. But in terms of the not but with the empirical evidence that we've had, when I did work in Toronto, I did it with a soccer group. One of them said, no, you can't take Lyman and Old Talk into academia because then it will spoil Lyman and Old Talk for us and it will become serious. Well, two things I had with that. why does academia have to be serious? And why, if we don't do it, somebody else will do it who's not Caribbean, and all of a sudden it will be good. But because it's such, it seems we doing our thing, it's problematic. But the thing about how we perceive it, I mean, I think we have socially constructed in the Caribbean and the world over what academia should look like. And we have socially constructed this way because of status and, to be honest, because of power. And we like that hierarchy between us as academics and the people who share the knowledge with us. But the people who actually share the knowledge with us are the ones who hold that knowledge. And we would be nowhere without those people who share that knowledge with us. So if we have socially constructed academia to be this hierarchical, serious, distant thing, we need to socially deconstruct that ourselves. We need to bring people in, and we need to get into people's spaces so that within doing that, within affirming our methodologies, we attempt to erase a lot of colonial legacies of status and power and hierarchies that have done nothing of benefit to us as Caribbean peoples. So if people see old talk as something casual and not academic, well, we have to think about who caused them to see that. If we did it, then we need to undo that. And it is our responsibility to do that, because we need to not make academia this sort of mystique that only certain people have access to.
So, Camille, so to that point is what I was going to mention, and I've been silently contemplating it, right? The next book that we have, which is through SUNY Press, is looking at the higher education as a plantation, right? And literally, the University of the West Indies, Mona campus in particular, was constructed on a plantation. The reason why I said that is, and it goes back to Suzanne's point when she spoke at Herbert, when she spoke about for whom and for what are we doing CRM. The reason why I'm saying that is, we were created, whether we like it or not, through what Yancey and Winter has spoken about, the colonial gaze. It is a conscious decision, and I think what this group is also trying to provoke within academia, which is perfectly fine, I'm all for the fight, is to disrupt that colonial gaze within those who we know will develop those legacies. But the very process of dissertating is a colonial process. The very process of collecting research is a colonial process, right? Some of the fundamental questions that need to be asked, because knowledge, as most of you have said, especially very unique to the Caribbean, is that these conversations cannot happen without the psychologists in the room and the historians in the room. And the reason why is the psychologists in the room have been lauded to develop these items in which we, in even qualitative research, have then transferred into qualitative thematic understanding, which I know Prof is on here, so she can definitely speak towards that. The historians in the room will let us know through the research I did with the decolonizing, the very researchers were afraid of answering the question, what it means to be a Caribbean researcher. Those two words there, in terms of what Linda Twighe-Smith has spoken about, the literal violence that comes with those two words, bringing them together, has to be contended with. We as I'm going to generalize for the group, but liberatory type of methodology researchers, we are in institutionalized sanctioned violence by being in institutions that do not recognize Caribbean methodologies, for those of us who are living in it and then in the diaspora doing it, right? So one of the things is those who are actually in the diaspora sometimes better understand what it actually means to be a Caribbean researcher than those who are here who believe within the assimilation and normativity of just having that academic semblance, right? So some of the very issues that we're trying to tackle are the very people that have been grown and who we are growing within this very much, this academy. So when Anna spoke about the resistance, we have a little bit of a luxury within here, within our ethics processes, because we have, for particularly at Mona campus, we have faculty level ethics boards in which we can direct more of what you're talking about in terms of the cancellation of the consent form, stuff like that. But at the root of it, if part of the methodology is to understand a Caribbean research on what those two things mean, we also have to grapple with with disrupting our entire past. And that means the way we were brought up, our home past, the way that we got our degrees, the way that we've assimilated into this academic culture. I think those are some of the formidable things that this group could do in terms of identifying for, decolonizing or radical or revolutionary researchers, these various approaches that Caribbean methodologies encompass, not only Lyman and Old Talk, but there's aspect of the heuristic process that we have to go through ourselves, portraiture. And so I've been seeing everybody's talk about how these things compare. I agree we shouldn't compare, but I do believe that we need to almost do a glossary of these various methodologies that currently exist and how we can support future researchers and those currently in the academy, in the Caribbean and in diaspora, because those people will be the very same people who will be like, this is not for us. In the Caribbean, be like, we do that at home, but we don't do that in the academy. There's two different spaces. So one of the things I think about, what is going to be the purpose of the organization or the consortium in order to move, because you're disrupting people's professorships. You're disrupting people's ways of understanding who they were. That's the reality. So if you're willing to do that, I'm all for it. Let's fight for the people. But you are literally saying, you got your professorship based on colonialism. Are you willing to strip that title off and admit that what you've only done is reappropriated the very colonialism that we're trying to disrupt 50 years out of independence, 60 years, 70 years out of independence as a region?
I think you hit the nail in the head right there when you said this is something that we do at home, but this is not something that is appropriate for academia. And I think disrupting that discourse has to do with the process of saying that having been told for centuries that what we do does not classify as valid knowledge, and what we know does not classify as valid knowledge, is what Camille was referring to when she was saying that when we see something that is too much fun or that is too unstructured, we automatically say this is how we do things, but this is not the way of doing things. But this idea is not just floating in the air. This idea has been systematically imposed as a system of knowledge. And I think by acknowledging our own challenges in coming to terms with a different way of seeing our work as researchers and being authentic and saying, well, I'm struggling too, to come to terms to that. Because how many times I cannot tell you, I have questioned, oh my God, did I say too much? Did I share too much? Is this breaching any sort of, so by not portraying ourselves as superhumans who have been able to just take the veil of colonization off of our eyes and acknowledging that this is not a magic process and it's actually bloody hard work to actually unlearn everything that we have learned, because we have all been brought up. Cuba is usually seen as a very disruptive space because of the relationship with the United States and so on and so forth. But I can testify that higher education is pretty much very Western and very colonialized in the way that we are brought up as researchers. Yes, politically we may be disruptors, but when it comes to research, we have to do things the Western way. So for the sake of time, I see that we have run out, so it is your choice, guys. I will do the same as Camille. There's something else that people are burning to say.
Anna, if I can just
Camille?
Joanne and Shakisha and Natalie speak. Well, Joanne first. Sorry, Joanne, Natalie, and Shakisha, because we haven't heard from Joanne and Natalie. Joanne, you there?
Thank you very much. Yes, very excited by the discussion. I think I said the same thing in the conference in 2018. 20 years ago, I was in the space with Russell Bishop and all of those researchers who were looking at Papa Mari. Linda's book had just come out. These were the exact questions. I was in the room, to quote Hamilton, in the room when it happened, when they would have those kinds of discussions. And what I just want to say, researchers, is that we just need to have the faith, keep putting one foot in front of the other and understand what Saran just said, what this will involve. It will shake us up at a personal level and at a professional level. But we have to understand that if it does not happen, you said 50, 60 years since independence, another 100 years will pass, and we will not, as Caribbean people, recognize how important our own knowledge and understanding is. So I am excited to be part of the group and having the vision of looking back on the 20 years. It's interesting. I know when I went to New Zealand, I said to myself, going to New Zealand made me see certain things very clearly about our upbringing in the Caribbean. And here, 20 years later, to the date, literally, I have a group of people who are Caribbean people who have had some contact with New Zealand, and this is developing. I'm very excited.
Thank you, Georgianne. Can we hear from Nigel next?
No, it's not Nigel. Not Natalie, I think, and then Nigel.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Camille. Yeah, Natalie and then Nigel.
Oh, hi, good evening. I didn't really have a question. I was just commenting and very grateful for the discussion that is going on. I definitely agree with everything that is being brought up, especially what Saran and Anna were just discussing. And all I can say is that, we unfortunately, even working within an academic circumstance here in Barbados, I don't find that we're having enough of these kind of boundary pushing conversations. And I know that a lot of that has to do with sustainability, because to be sustainable as an academic institution, and I'm under the cultural studies department, which can often be fragile as well, that these kind of compromises for pushing the boundaries of qualitative research is almost like a means to survive. But I'm very grateful for these conversations. So thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Hello.
Nigel?
Yes, thanks again for all your efforts. My apologies if I have a very naive question. While I am supportive of what I think is the concept, I wonder if you can clarify for me, in 2019, what does decolonization look like? I mean, how would you write? How would you distribute information? How would you communicate? If that makes any sense.
Are you talking about the process, or are you talking about what it would mean?
Well, maybe both. So maybe the term I might use might be an endpoint.
Sorry?
The term I would use would be an endpoint, or what I'd call an endpoint calibration. So the objective is to look at decolonization. Is there a framework or a concept of what decolonization looks like?
If you look at the Caribbean region from a pan-Caribbean point of view, taking into account that we are a collection of islands that speak at least 5 official languages, just talking about language alone, and have so many other dialects and subcultural groups and all of that. I don't think there is one answer to that. I think the richness and the validity of what we're doing is that we're going to keep that. There's going to be as many strategies as there are people or even groups or communities or cultures in the region. And I think the way that correct me if your question was not coming from that point of view, but I have asked the questions myself. We are writing this thing in computers. We are publishing it on the internet. We're using the platform that has been set up by the colonizers. And we are, as Saran was mentioning earlier, we're working in institutions that pretty much perpetuate the structure of how knowledge is constructed. So how can we be speaking in 2019 in the era of the internet and globalization about decolonization? What the hell we're talking about? So that makes me think about language, for example. When we think about how we use English and how we use Spanish, to use my mother tongue as an example, we have disrupted the colonizers' ways, not by rejecting it and choosing something else, but by transforming it. and by making it something that is compliant to our ways of living life and to our ways of experiencing the world, and going back to what Winter refers to as that transformation that came with the clash. So for me, talking about decolonization in 2019 implies that idea that we, by using and transforming and challenging and mocking the structures that have been set up by the colonizer, that can bring about a profound change, because by bringing it closer to our experience as a people, we are necessarily creating a transformation.
And, you know, to go to your point, it depends on who are your intellectual family, who you're using. If you're using like Frantz Fanon's work on decolonization back in the 60s, he would have told you that decolonization is a historical process, but it is not a set of magical practices, not intelligible, and it is not clear in and of itself, because of the various movements that will continue to move against a very, you know, old way of understanding, knowing, power, knowledge, and those dichotomies between the oppressed and the oppressive. So it depends on who you use, and because it is not a one-size-fits-all. Decolonizing movement right now in South Africa looks very different from the decolonization movement in Canada, for example. So when it comes to and decolonizing in the Caribbean also looks very different in the construction of our curricula. And so our curricula through, in particular, the Anglophone, I mean, Cuba has been doing it very well, and we're just following suit with knowing about our history and reinforcing that, right? And so the decon and affirmative history written for and by. So, but decolonizing isn't a standard set definition because of the fluidity of the intellectual family who have written about it. So there's decolonization of the mind, which is a separate body of canon of knowledge from decolonization of education, from decolonization of psychology, sociology. So it really depends on which family, intellectual family you're reading, and, you know, it's not just one set thing.
I just want to say something. Nigel, Joanne, and Chika Sukan. I think, to me, sometimes you get to the point of talking about decolonizing, and I totally support the concept and how we got there. But I wonder sometimes if that is sort of an obstacle or not a stumbling block, or sort of a procrastination point to stop us moving forward and embracing what we have. Because we know about decolonizing. We decolonize everything, but we have not, as Sarah but they decolonize our minds and our way of thinking. And that's because we haven't opened up the space to embrace what we actually have and we actually value. So to me, decolonizing only gets us this far and doesn't get us across the line of to where we need to be. It's useful for that, but I'm asking the question, is it holding us back? Is it letting us procrastinate? When we have to do the dishes, we find something else to do. So when we have to make that challenge to actually affirm and embrace what we have, and seeing all the comments that come from Barry, from Siran, from Joanne, from Veronica, everybody else, what it is we need to do is affirming what we have. That difficult, but I mean, just something to think about. But I do realize we're on 11:39. Sorry, guys, and I just want, before people leave, I do not know what commitments you have, but if Sharon could just talk briefly about the conference and the possibility of the selected papers for a special edition, that would be good. Sharon, if I can just have.
Yep. Sure. So I met with the core team, or I forget when it was, guys. I think it was March or end of February. And we were propositioned as in terms of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, in particular the School of Education, to host the 2020 offering of the Caribbean Methodologies Conference. So we're happy to do that here. We are looking at hosting it in the regional headquarters, which is across the street, that has a really nice platform, etc. and having it hosted or co-partnered with the faculty overall, as I am charged with providing professional development for the faculty. This is gonna be my, this is gonna be what I'm gonna be like, hey, this is what I'm putting our budget towards. so yeah, I got that okay, which was really nice. With regarding the book, I am, for now, I do plan to give it up because I'm exhausted, but I'm right now the chief editor for the Journal of Education and Development in the Caribbean. So what I've set forward for the next 2 issues is that the next special issue that we offer will come from the 2021 issue, special issue will come from papers from the conference itself. And do want to tell Camille and her co-authors that your second reviewer's feedback came in and it was fantastic. So congratulations on that. You will receive tomorrow the official letter of acceptance and with minor edits. It was quite, and I made sure that the reviewers were traditional methodologists. And so I really wanted to see what their take would be on it, and it was fantastic. I thought that they probed the right questions. You guys will see the feedback, but it stimulates a lot of conversation among them and discussing what this meant. So it was great.
For that, the others don't know, but this is a paper that we were writing. I'm writing it with some young scholars and young Caribbean people, because I'm trying to get everybody into that space, and I'm co-authoring with young people and we're working together on it, and so they would be really, really, really pleased to hear that, Siran, because they and nervous and biting the nails about what would happen. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, very happy about that. So we are looking at next semester 1, like September 2020 is what we had spoken about. And so it gives us quite a bit of time to start the planning, to put the budgets together, and to look at like call for papers and stuff like that. So yeah, so actually Jennifer, who was on the call earlier, we got a grant and they'll be here in October. So she and her team, so my professional development money going towards that in October. So I was kind of happy that I was like, okay, this is 2020. I only have this much budget every year for professional development. And so, yeah, it's kind of nice how small the world is.
Thank you for that. I've noticed we only have 3 more minutes to do a concluding discussion. Is there anyone who hasn't said anything, like to say anything, or anyone who has spoken before? I don't think we've from Heather.
Can I just give a quick plug?
Yes.
Again, I just came from AERA in Toronto. And this year, I am the program chair for the Caribbean SIG, Caribbean and African Studies and Education SIG. And I just want to encourage every single person to put in a paper. The more papers we have, the more slots we have. The more slots we have, the more opportunities. And this would be a great area to put forward a symposium. So if, I don't know if there's existing work, but if you can put together a simple, I have to be out because as program chair, I need to keep neutral. But I want to encourage, if you can get a symposium together, the call for papers will come out shortly and the deadline.
And we put it on our website, and everybody there, if you have anything that you want to put on our website.
Anything, as many papers as possible. The more entries, the more slots. That we will have in the final conference. But I think it would be, I would be thrilled as program chair if in 2020 we could make an appearance in the KSIG in AERA with a symposium on Caribbean methodology.
Challenge accepted.
For our website, Joy.
That's the challenge. And I mean, as program chair, I have to be neutral. And of course, your symposium will go out to the reviewers. But if we have a strong symposium, it would be a great place. And we're in San Francisco next year.
Joanne, could you send me that in an email and we'll put it on our website?
Okay, no problem. Will do. Sure. That's it.
Is there anyone else we haven't heard from that would like to say something? Nigel, are you still there? Your hand is still up.
Yeah.
Letitia?
Yeah, I would like to say too.
I can't hear.
I would like to pull my hand down, but I can't figure out how to do it from here.
All right, that's okay then. Noted then. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would like to say, Camille.
Yes, Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, it was great engaging ourselves in this discussion. And as you all were talking, it took me back to my anthropology days where we did some ethnographic study. And that old liming and old talk when we used to go and collect data used to happen at nights, sitting around a campfire, engaging people in the talk. I think that's as close as I would have got to liming. So it brought those memories so fresh. And these were in the rural areas, in the tribal communities. We did a lot of research in the tribal communities. But what you have been talking here was taking the same scenarios, what we do in the tribal communities, bringing it to the, in the urban setting, or it could be mostly urban setting. So I think we could use the same mechanisms that we use in the tribal study and then bring something into the study that we do in the rural and in the urban and in the contemporary societies. So I think it will be a good contribution in that way.
Yes. Okay, Susan, you've sort of frozen. Your beautiful face is still up there. Okay, everybody, I noticed it's 11:45. I would
Scientific and all of those things, but we have to also work more hard to say how we could validate our LOT, as you have been saying there, with regards to its credibility, transferability, and stuff like that. So we are going to work on it, and we would contribute to the discussion and formulating of the methodology. I'll be really excited and looking forward for that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Now, I'd like to call this forum to a close.
Before you call it to a close, Camille, I think it's important to look at the next step. And a part of that is in terms of the opportunities and really charging each of us to identify in our own geographical spaces and otherwise opportunities to actually engage, interrogate, or challenge whatever it is, whether we're challenging the traditional Western approaches and creating spaces to really be true to ourselves as Caribbean people and our own Caribbean approaches. And it's not just in terms of academia. Many of us are involved in program or policy planning, and these settings also provide an opportunity for us to introduce Caribbean research ways, Caribbean research methodologies. And it's interesting, I think it was Natalie who mentioned the term sustainability, and this is just something to think about, because oftentimes when we talk about sustainability, especially of a project, we think of the dependency and the funding that comes from external sources. So these are just some things for us to grapple with as we move forward. And I'm sure there will be other forums like this. And Camille, as our moderator, I'm handing back to you so that we can touch on that and maybe to see when persons might be keen on doing another meeting of this nature.
Yes. Okay. A quick question then before. Is everyone here okay for another forum session type? Not
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. It's in the next 6 months, you think?
Sure. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, I'm ready.
All right. I like that. Now, okay. So what I will do in the next email that goes out, Shakisha, I'm going to ask you to write down what those next steps are so people can think about it and come back to it for the next one, because what you just said, Shak, there was really, really important. So if you send that to me in an email, I will put that and send it out to everyone. Joyanne, if you can send me those conference details, I'll also put that in the email, and we'll also put it on the website. So before we go, I would like to thank all of you so very, very much for coming in. We'll probably send you a feedback form for you to fill out. And give us some information. It is recorded, so it will be available. I know Susan took a lot of notes. That's wonderful. Susan, the type of person I want in my class. It will be available though on the website the two lovely people who were here told me, don't shut down the computer, Camille, until it converts to an MP3. Royan, send the details. Shakisha, next steps. Thank you so much, every one of you, for taking part in this. And Kakiteano or Matewa, which means see you soon, Kakiteano. Talk soon, everybody. Ngamihi.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Good
That's
day.
wonderful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.